and I'll start the introductions when I can find the right course to share with you. Just bear with me while I get used to the technology again. Good. Right, I can share the right screen. Right, hopefully everybody can see the slide deck I'm presenting. So today, this is roughly a 1 hour introduction to the Direct, Plan and Improve training course, which we offer either as self-paced e-learning or at the moment virtual learning, and hopefully sometime in the future we'll go back to face-to-face training, but not quite yet. Right, so the rules for today, if everybody could keep their microphones on mute. If you disconnect, I think the easiest approach is just sign back in again. The session will be recorded, and I said it will be placed on our website in a couple of different places, and we'll send you the link probably tomorrow morning, I think, by the time it's loaded. And Debbie, who's our sales manager, should be on the session. She was a few minutes ago. So if you've any questions, if you want, ask a chat question while we go through. Unfortunately, we don't have Bob Amies, one of our other trainers, on the session today. He's busy delivering a virtual service delivery manager workshop. So if there's any questions Debbie can't answer, I'd be happy to answer them at the end, or feel free to send me an email or call me. I'm quite happy to pick up a telephone call. So Purple Griffin, we've been around for about 18 years now, over 18 years. We're UK based, we do operate worldwide, so we have travelled to various countries around the globe, and we currently offer somewhere in the region of about 300 different courses. And this is myself. So I'm a trainer consultant. In terms of consultancy, I do things like maturity assessments against processes V2, V3, and it will be practice assessments for ITIL 4. Worked for several companies over the years, Allied Bakeries, Barclays Bank, AXA Assurance, O2, HMRC. And various guises. So most of the roles mentioned in ITIL I've covered over those 40 years. And I've been working directly with ITIL for the last 30 years. So ITIL version 1 right up to ITIL 4. And I've been certified as a trainer in each of those versions. As well as ITIL, I deliver VeriSM or Verism training, DevOps, ITAM, SIAM, and more recently, artificial intelligence. Okay, so let's get back to Direct, Plan and Improve. We run it as a 3-day course, virtually and classroom. The e-learning self-paced module would take you between 12 and 16 hours roughly to go through. And there is a book available. So the book is available via the stationery office, or you can get it online via Amazon, I suspect. Not cheap. And the DPI course probably covers about 50% of the content of the book. If you attend one of our virtual training courses, you will be sent one of the books directly. Unfortunately, we can't send the books out for the e-learning course, but they are available. Okay, so today, purpose of this webinar really is to give you an introduction to Direct Plan and Improve, explain why attending a DPI course and taking the exam would be of use, looking at the content of DPI, what elements are new and what's the same, so what was actually covered in ITIL version 3, but it was maybe changed slightly, or there was less emphasis on it. Or it was there, but it was hidden. It wasn't part of the life cycle courses or the capability modules that were available in ITIL version 3. Okay, and an opportunity to ask some questions at the end. So where does DPI sit in the certification scheme that Axelos have engineered? You can see from the diagram it sits in two places. It sits in the ITIL Managing Professional stream and also in the Strategic Leader stream. So it's relevant to both sides. In terms of the sequence in which you should take the courses, I was sent an email about this the other day. If you're doing Strategic Leader, if that's what you're aiming for, do DPI first, then the ITIL Leader Digital and IT Strategy course. If you're taking the Managing Professional, my advice would be to do Create, Deliver and Support first, then Drive Stakeholder Value, then Direct Plan and Improve, and lastly High Velocity IT. That's just my opinion, and all the courses do stand on their own, and in theory you can take them in any order. If you're looking to move to Managing Professional certification via the Managing Professional Transition module from ITIL version 3, that module will cover probably about 30, maybe 40% of the Direct Plan and Improve content, course content, which probably then translates to about a sixth of the book content. And ITIL Foundation is a prerequisite for any of these intermediate level courses. I'm sure if you contact Debbie or info@purplegriffin.com, then they'll come up with a deal in some shape or form to get you on one or more of these courses. Just talking to someone earlier today who was asking about ITIL Master. We still haven't been told what the qualifications are to achieve ITIL Master at ITIL 4. All that Axelos were saying recently was if you have Managing Professional and Strategic Leader, you're on the road to ITIL Master. They didn't actually say whether there would be an exam or an automatic accreditation. And I keep meaning to chase them up again to find out what the latest is for that. Okay, so the exam for DPI, it's the same as the other courses, the intermediate level courses, except for DITS, where that is slightly different. There are assignments as part of the examination there for that level. But the DPI course is 90-minute exam. It's a standard 4-option multiple choice is the answer A, B, C or D. Okay. So very simple. It's not like the ITIL version 3 intermediate courses where there were graded marks depending on which was the best answer that you chose. Pass mark is 28 out of 40, so it's 70%, unlike the foundation, which is 26 out of 40. And in terms of the complexity of the questions, about a third of them are Bloom's level 2, and that's really that you can explain, describe, and you understand the concept. So maybe the concept of value. So can you describe what value is in ITIL terms? Is it A, B, C or D? 2/3 of the questions will be at Bloom's level 3, and this is where you can apply a concept or some technology or terminology to a small scenario. And the scenario is typically 1 or 2 lines. So very simple scenario, very simple level of answer, although some are more wordy than others. If your first language is not English, you can apply for an extra 25% time to take the exam. The exams are accredited by PeopleCert. There's just one examining institute at the moment. And the exams are currently all proctored online exams. So two tips there. One, read what you're sent by PeopleCert in terms of testing that your technology will work, you're using the right technology. And the other tip really is if you're using a company laptop or company desktop with a webcam, make sure the technology will work, that it will load the exam screen, that your system isn't locked down so much that it can't load the exam shield to allow you to take the exam. So DPI. So DPI stands for Direct, Plan and Improve. Where does the direct come from? Well, it comes from the governance element of the SVS. So it's the direction is contained within governance. Governance has a number of purposes, as we'll see later, but one of them is to provide direction. So we take the element out of that. The plan and improve come out of the value chain. So these are the sort of overarching elements from the value chain, and we use those. We use the best practice there. So the plan is planning, any form of planning, not just project or program planning. It's applicable to sort of waterfall or agile approaches, and it's also for planning how you onboard a customer, how you plan a release. So it's big planning. And in terms of improvement, you may also know that there is a continual improvement practice, which is specifically for how we improve in terms of the techniques. This improvement really is overarching. It's how we improve any element of the service value system. Okay, so on the DPI course, we'll cover the basic elements. So we'll cover the SVS, we'll look at the value chain, we'll look at value streams, and we'll look at the 4 dimensions. We'll also revisit the guiding principles, the 7 guiding principles of ITIL 4. You would have already covered this at foundation level, but we think it's worthwhile revisiting it as the introduction really to the DPI training course. And that's because you may have taken your foundation course 12 months, 18 months ago, and you may have forgotten some of the concepts. So it's worthwhile revisiting them. So the trainer will take you through the basic elements and basic concepts. Then we start to look a bit more in depth in terms of direct, plan and improve, looking at some specific terms. So does the course candidate understand the meaning of direction? What does direction mean? What does planning mean? What does improvement mean? What's an operating model? So that the SVS is an operating model. The term methods, risk, scope of control. So we'll look at each of these terms so you've got basic understanding of what they mean. And we'll also look at the differences between one term and another. So we'll look at the difference between what's a vision, what's a mission. So a vision is basically an aspiration, and a mission are the activities you're going to undertake to get to the place that you want to get to. We'll look at the difference between strategy, tactics, and operations, what the meanings are, what the difference is, and how they're used. And we'll also look at things like governance, compliance, and management, and policies, controls, and guidelines. So but policies are there to give us our boundaries. There's things which we must do. So we could equate it to a health and safety policy. These are the things, if you're working on a building site, these are the things that you must do. And the controls, the checks and balances, which allow us to see whether policies are being adhered to, and guidelines. So guidelines which give us some guidance in terms of what we should really be doing, but give us some flexibility. So we'll look at the differences between them. We'll also look at the term value. We do realise that you've covered this at foundation level. We'll look at it in a little bit more detail in terms of a balance. So what is value? So someone's perception of value. It's about the affected outcomes, the costs introduced and risks introduced, get balanced against supported outcomes, costs removed and risks removed. It could be that you've not removed any risks, but we've reduced costs and supported the outcomes. So that would still give us a balance there. But quite often it's down to your perception of the outcomes, the costs and the risks. Okay, another element of DPI is how we use some of the key principles and methods. What we have here is an objectives cascade, effectively. And so when we talk about strategies, when we talk about direction, it must come from the top, it must cascade down. So in terms of an organisation, the parent organisation, whatever that is, would cascade down objectives to maybe a service provider organisation, the IT department. And then in terms of the objectives there, they would then be cascaded down to the relevant teams or departments within IT. And we need to make sure that to ensure the objectives are being achieved, that we put various controls and indicators in place, and we monitor and measure the metrics to prove that the objectives are actually being achieved. So there's a cascade down, and there should also be feedback back up to the parent organisation to give them confidence in terms of the objectives are being achieved across the organisation. We can do this via reports and or dashboards, and it brings us on later in the DPI course to monitoring, measuring and reporting. One of the concepts we cover in DPI is scope of control, and really scope of control is the extent, the area over which we have authority. So it could be our scope of control. If I'm the service desk manager, is the service desk and the staff on the service desk. But individually, we all have our own scope of control. It's not just management and supervisory staff and team leaders who have scope of control. So individually, we have our own individual scope of control where we have our own level of authority. We also have this concept of scope of influence, and scope of influence tends to be wider than scope of control. And it's where maybe we haven't got control over the service desk, but maybe as a service desk analyst, I can influence the service desk manager. So I can find ways of influencing the service desk manager to send me on an ITIL 4 foundation course, for instance. So we'll talk about that within the course, what scope of control is, what scope of influence is. Said we'd look at the difference between things like policies, control guidelines. So that's covered in a fair depth within the course, about how we establish controls to ensure policies are adhered to, and what we should do if policies aren't adhered to. I mentioned health and safety policies, but this could be a policy for change management. So it could be a change enablement, I should say now, excuse me. So it could be our change enablement policy, which says all changes, or part of the policy is all changes must be logged. So how do we control that? And we could also add guidelines in terms of some sort of discretion or leeway in terms of the amount of data which is logged within that change record. So we'll look at the differences between those concepts. We said one of the areas we're going to cover in the course is risk, and risk forms part of what we call GRC, governance, risk and compliance. And we'll look at different types of risks. So we'll look at long-term, medium, short-term risk. We'll look at the risk as it pertains to direction, planning and improvement. And we'll look at different types of risk. And basically risk falls into 4 categories. With strategic risk, program risk, project risk, and latterly operational risk. And operational risk mainly tend to be short-term risks, whereas strategic risks tend to be long-term. So we'll look at the different types of risks and how they're managed. So how do we mitigate risk? How do we mitigate long-term risk or short-term risk? So we spend a fair amount of time talking about risk management. And risk is one of the practices at ITIL 4. So we may look at where risk exists, and in reality it exists everywhere. We'll look at how we can give direction without taking risks into account, and how this may be counterproductive. So we need to understand the risk of maybe someone not understanding what they've been asked to do. We'll look at how risks can be managed, so what mitigation we can put in place, alternative approaches maybe to reduce our risk to within our risk appetite. We'll look at how improvement actions may contain risks and how they can be managed. And this, we could look at the risk of doing something, but equally there's a risk of not doing something. And we can look at how we effectively manage risk throughout the life cycle of planning and improvement, and also direction. So just going back to governance for a moment, any element of the SVS really should have some governance on it. So SVS could be across the whole organization, or it could be applied to a department or a section or a team. It doesn't have to be across the whole organization, but the governance which controls where the SVS has been implemented really needs to come from the very top in the parent organization. Okay, so if we have a team which is managing service management, then we don't create our own governance. The governance really needs to come from the parent organization, or the top of our organization. So we'll also look at roles within governance. So we'll look at the board of directors, we'll look at shareholders, we'll look at the role of the audit committee. We'll look at their different roles, what they're responsible for within the management of risk, and also the management of the overall governance within the organisation. Part of DPI is improvement, and in CSI, continual service improvement, was part of ITIL version 3. In ITIL 4, the service has been dropped from the title, so we talk about continual improvement. It's part of our overall SVS, but as I said earlier, it's also a practice within ITIL 4. So what we're looking at really here is improvement of any element of the SVS. Okay, so the model that we use, the continual improvement model, which we'll see in a minute, It's not rigid. It's meant to be adopted and adapted for different organisations. I think a lot of people didn't implement continual improvement because they thought it was quite rigid. They'd have to have a continual improvement manager or a CSI manager. They'd have to set up various controls. But it's really flexible. It's about having a flexible, simple method of managing improvement within your organisation. Okay, and it should really be part of the overall strategy. It should be part of everything we do. Everything should be subject to continual review and improvement. Some of you may recognise this diagram. It's very similar to what we call the CSI approach in ITIL version 3, and this is our new continual improvement model. You may note there's an extra step which has been added at ITIL 4, and that step is take action. This is where we execute the improvement actions. I think in ITIL version 3 it was just assumed that we would take the action, but now it's more specific. So the various steps are, what is the vision? Where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? Take the action to get there. Did we get there? And keeping the momentum going. Normally, most years, I go on holiday to Cornwall, but not this year, unfortunately. So I use this improvement model to get me to my holidays. So in terms of the vision, it's a beach in Cornwall. Where am I now? I'm in Kendal in the UK in the Lake District. Where do I want to be? So what's an achievable target? So I want to be at Preston. How do I get there? The M6 motorway, take the action, start driving. Did I get there? I've just passed the road sign for Preston. How do you keep momentum going? Drive smoothly and safely. What's the vision? Still a beach in Cornwall. Where am I now? I've got to Preston. Where do I want to be? What's achievable? So it's Birmingham. How do I get there? Keep going down the M6 motorway. So you can apply continual improvement to anything. So whether it's something you want to achieve, whether you want to increase something or make something better, or whether you want to reduce something like maybe reduce cost or reduce risk, you can apply continual improvement. A few years ago, I did a workshop for a building society in the UK, and over the course of 2 days, we applied the continual improvement approach, as it was then under V3, to 4 process areas, and we identified 128 improvements over 2 days. So it can be applied to anything. It can be applied to processes, practices, it can be applied across the whole SVS or some elements of the SVS. We can even look at how we improve the way that we improve. Okay, so as we said, it can be applied across the whole SVS. We have a definition that we need to remember because it might crop up in the DPI exam, which is what's a change agent? And a change agent really is just a role that facilitates development, application, advocation of new ways of working. So change agent could be a change manager, could be a team leader. Okay. And one probably last thing to mention is a lot of people think that this continual improvement model really is just a single step through. It's a one-way road. Really, it can be more flexible, so you can revisit previous steps. So, for instance, going on my holidays, if there was a crash or something which was blocking the motorway, I could then go for some down some side roads to a diversion to actually get round the blockage on the motorway. So equally, we can do that with the continual improvement model. Or it could be that we've just had the really bad weather for the next 2 weeks in Cornwall, so we've decided to go home. so we can go back, we can retrace our steps. Okay, and we can do that with our continual improvement model. Okay, so in terms of the model itself, there's various techniques we can use. So we can use various assessment methods to define where we are, where we want to get to, whether we've got there. So as part of the DPI course, we'll look at concepts and techniques and methods and approaches. So we'll look at things like gap analysis, how we define a gap between the vision and where we would get to if we do nothing. We look at SWOT analysis, so strengths and weaknesses, which are internal to the organisation, and opportunities and threats, which are external. We can look at change readiness assessments. So maybe we want to do this before we do take action. We can look at customer user satisfaction surveys and analysis. So did we actually get to where we wanted to get to? And equally, we could use service level achievements analysis as a technique. We'll look at benchmarking, and we'll look at also maturity assessments. So different types of maturity assessments. The most common one is process maturity assessment. So working out where we are on maybe on a scale of 0 to 5. Okay, it's also as part of continual improvement. Sometimes we need to prioritize our improvement initiatives. So we need to build a business case for them. We need to communicate and advocate a business case to management or to our partners, suppliers, customers. We'll also consider what's the life of a business case. So a business case must be there for only live service. It must have a valid business case, otherwise why are we providing that live service? And we'll also look at improvement reviews in terms of assessing the priority of the various improvement initiatives that we've got logged in our continual improvement register. And we'll also look at how we could embed a commitment to continual improvement across the organisation, and we build it into the culture of the organisation. So every time we implement something, we should build some way of improving it. Okay, another element of the DPI course is the OCM, so the Organisational Change Management Practice. And this is applicable to direction, planning, improvement. It's the only practice really we cover in any detail in DPI. And it's probably one of the ones which is covered across the intermediate level courses to some extent, because it's all about making change, and change involves people. So we need to look at how we can improve the way people work. So we'll be looking at attitudes, behaviour, culture. We'll be looking at OCM in small and large organisations. And also in terms of OCM, typically it's about how we involve people in organisational change management, how we change mindsets, how we get people to do what we would like them to do. And even if it's just a technology change, people will be involved. So there's still an element of OCM that we need to take into account. So it really focuses on the human side of change. And it also helps us ensure that the changes we're making will be successful. Okay. You've probably spotted the two guiding principles on the side. And this is because the guiding principles are more relevant to some areas than others, but they are still areas that we need to look at to see whether they're applicable. So the two which are most applicable to OCM is really start where you are and to think and work holistically. Okay, they are all interconnected, so that they will be connected to focus on value and optimize and automate, and the other guiding principles. Another thing we look at within OCM and within the DPI course is things like stakeholder mapping. So identifying the various stakeholders within the change that we're looking to make, and identifying who are the critical stakeholders, who have the power and influence, and can provide input, and also have high level of interest and maybe involvement. So we need to treat the different stakeholders in different ways. So we've got critical, major, significant, and minor shareholders. And we'll look at how we engage with the critical ones, how we satisfy major stakeholders, how we inform significant stakeholders, and how we monitor and inform the minor stakeholders. Okay. So another element of DPI, which we're going to cover in the course, is monitoring, measuring, and reporting. So we need to understand what measurements and reporting is about. And it's really monitoring, measuring, and reporting is really about giving management and change advocates, change agents, team leaders, all relevant stakeholders, information on which they can base good decisions. So if there's if we're looking at, say, performance of a service, then we want to monitor and measure the key elements of that service, which could be technology, could be some form of supplier involvement, it could be staff, it could be process. So what do we want to monitor and measure? Why are we going to monitor and measure? And how are we going to present that information to the person who's going to make the decision? Okay, so we'll be looking at this in a fair amount of detail in DPI course. Okay, we also need to understand why we're monitoring and measuring. And this diagram, you probably recognize something very similar to this from ITIL version 3. We used to say that we monitor and measure to validate, justify, direct, and intervene. The direct has been changed to influence. So there's basically 4 reasons why we would want to measure, and that's really to validate a strategic vision, to influence people to take action, to intervene where maybe the action is not what we wanted to do, so what we set out to do. So we need to intervene to make sure that people are now doing what we've told them they should stop doing, or sorry, they should stop doing what we've told them they should stop doing, and doing an alternative approach maybe. And to justify, so provide evidence that what we said we were going to achieve, we did actually achieve. Okay, so another element of DPI is looking at our value streams. And value streams, or 2 of the value streams, are covered in the create, deliver, and support intermediate level course. So we look at that. That's the course that looks at them in detail. In DPI, really, we're looking at how we can improve the value stream, or how value stream mapping allows us to actually visualize the opportunity for improvement and the planning of improvements. So we can look at value streams. So we'll look at that within the course. We'll also talk about practices and the processes within practices and how they map onto the value stream, and how we can determine any improvements that we need to make. there's also to remember that the value streams may not be wholly within our organisation. They may involve various partners, suppliers, consumer organisations as well. So this little diagram sort of maps value stream steps to our practice guides. So the example here could be, we've got 3 steps in a value stream. If this is some sort of support value stream, so step 1, maybe the activities of the practice there may be to log an incident. Step 2, maybe to analyze that incident. And step 3, identify the root cause of the incident, of the problem, the underlying problem. So in terms of the practices, this could be step 1, service desk, step 2, incident management, step 3, problem management. But they're going to draw upon data and information and input from other practices. So along the bottom, we've got practice Y. This could be knowledge management. So the service desk, incident, and problem are all going to draw on input from knowledge management. Just for example, what have we got? Let's see, practice D could be change enablement. So we're pulling information there from the change enablement process and the practice to feed into incident and problem management. Okay, so we'll look at the relationships between the value streams and the practices, and identify how they work in practice, what value stream mapping actually is, and how we can use value streams to identify improvements. And the way that we can look at the techniques and the methods and approaches we can use are things like lean, so we can identify waste within the value stream, and we can look at is that waste necessary? Is there waste which we can reduce or remove from the value stream? And it might be we've added some delay in there, which we don't need anymore, so we can take that out because it's wasteful. Or maybe we've reduced some reporting, which is no longer required, so that can go as well. We will also look at things like leading and lagging indicators of the performance of a value stream. We look at process metrics, so what should we be monitoring and measuring around processes. So we'll look at those and the critical success factors and key performance indicators for the processes. We'll look at flow efficiency. So are there any bottlenecks within our value stream? We can apply the 7 guiding principles, so we can take each of those and apply them to the various steps and activities within each step within the value stream. Probably the main one we should mainly focus on is the guiding principle of focus on value, because that's the end point of this value stream. And we can look at value stream mapping itself. So this is a technique which it isn't really covered in ITIL to any great extent. Although we do talk about value streams, we don't actually explain very well or in any depth how to do value stream mapping. Okay, so it's an opportunity to explore that in a lot more detail. Other areas we can look at is avoiding things like local optimization, where we may optimize some element of the value stream, which would then cause bottlenecks elsewhere within the value stream. We'll look at design techniques, so how we can develop efficient design of our value stream. We'll look at the theory of constraints. We'll look at Kanban, the use of Kanban. There's a picture of a Kanban board there. So what benefits would a Kanban board give us in terms of identifying improvements to value streams and practices? And we'll look at reinforcement. So how do we impose reinforcement? So reinforcement learning across the value stream, and ensure people are carrying out the activities they should be carrying out. Okay, so in summary, what do we cover in the DPI course? Well, we go back to basics. We look at the SVS, we look at the value chain, we look at value streams, we look at the elements within the SVS. We also look at the 4 dimensions, so organisation and people, information technology, partners and suppliers, and value streams and processes, and how we can use those 4 areas to help us in terms of direction, planning and improving, but also how can we improve those areas. Okay. In terms of techniques, there's lots of techniques we'll be covering. So we look at things like scope of control, objectives, cascades, policies, standards, guidelines. We look at the decision-making authority. So where would we place change authority within the organisation to authorise change? Okay, we'll look at governance, risk and compliance and how that is individually can be achieved. We'll look at continual improvement and the various steps, the 7 steps within the continual improvement model. We'll look at value streams and practices, look at the various underpinning techniques that we have there. We'll go into a fair amount of detail on organisational change management, what the benefits are and how it actually works and how we can use it. And we'll also lastly look at measurement and reporting. So monitoring, measuring and reporting, what techniques we can use, and why we should monitor and measure and report. Okay, so what's the benefit, what's the purpose in terms of direction, planning and improving. Okay, so let's have a look at just to see the type of question that we have. I think this is Bloom's level 2. So let's have a look. So what's the best way to place decision-making authority? So should we A, all decision-making should be centralised? B, only managers should be allowed to make decisions? Or C, place it within the appropriate scope of control of a team? Or D, promote agility, decentralise all decision-making? So A, B, C or D. So have a think about it for a few seconds. So get a letter in your head, A, B, C or D, before I press the button. And the answer is C. Okay, it should be within the appropriate scope of control of a team. And the questions will be around this sort of level, maybe some a little bit more wordy, maybe a little bit more complex, but hopefully it won't put you off taking the course or taking the exam. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. I hope it's given you some interest in the direct plan and improve module, and the module would either allow you to either go for the managing professional or strategic leader stream, or it's valid to both. You only have to take the exam once. You don't have to take it for both streams. You'll be glad to hear. Right, okay. Hopefully Debbie has been able to handle any chat, because the alternative screen I have, the chat is, looks like it's frozen. Don't you just love technology? Right, it's just refreshing itself. Okay, Debbie, is there anything you can answer?
Oh, there's just one question asking what the average pass rate is for this course.
Oh, it's a relative new one. I don't think anyone's failed it. I can look it up, but I don't think anyone's failed the exam as far as I'm aware. No, So yeah, I suspect the pass rate to be for most training organisations to be somewhere between 80 and 90%. I suspect ours is somewhere there, but we've not had trying to think the last records. I will publish it, but I think it's 100%. I know we were on 100% for the MPT. I know we were on 100% for MPT until recently, when one person rushed the course, rushed the exam, and unfortunately failed by 1 point. But they did fail on retake. So, and now that's a similar level of complexity in terms of the question. The question level is level 2 and level 3 of Bloom's. Okay, and for those of you who don't know, it goes up to level 7, so there can be quite complex questions of how you may synthesize one concept and apply it in a similar way to achieve the same sort of goal. Right, so if there are no more questions, I will end the session, and I'll thank you all for listening in. And as I said, if anyone comes up with a question later, or if anyone's listening to this recording and decides they want to ask a question, either feel free to phone the office number, which is UK, so it's 44 1539 736 828, or email info@purplegriffon.com, or come on our website and click on the chat button, and you'd probably get through to myself, Debbie, Wendy, or one of us at least. Okay, well, have a nice day, and I'll call the session to an end. Stop the recording.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.